"This area is for active personnel only, old-timer." The voice was sharp, a razor's edge of youthful arrogance honed on the whetstone of newly acquired authority. Instructor Kyler, his crisp uniform a testament to regulation rather than experience, stood with his arms crossed, his subordinate Briggs a half-step behind him, mimicking the posture. They blocked the entrance to the Advanced Submarine Tactics Simulator, a building that smelled of ozone and polished linoleum. The old man before them, Arthur Jenkins, simply stood there, his gaze fixed on a bronze plaque on the far wall. His clothes were simple: a worn flannel shirt, clean but faded jeans, and a plain navy blue windbreaker. He looked like 1,000 other retirees who lived in the coastal town, perhaps a grandfather waiting to pick up a grandkid from the exchange. He didn't look like he belonged. "Did you hear me?" Kyler pressed, his voice rising. "This is a restricted facility. I need you to turn around and head back to the visitor center." Arthur's eyes, the color of a faded sea chart, finally shifted from the plaque to the young instructor. He offered no apology, no explanation. He simply said in a voice as quiet and calm as the deep ocean, "I heard you." The lack of deference, the absence of the expected shuffle of apology, was a spark on dry tinder. Kyler's jaw tightened. He saw not a man, but an obstacle. He saw wrinkled skin and a stoop in the shoulders and mistook it for weakness. He saw quietness and mistook it for civility. In his world of shouted commands and instant obedience, this placid stillness was a form of defiance. "Then you'll understand why I'm telling you to leave now." Briggs, ever the echo, added, "Show some respect for the uniform." "Pop." Arthur's gaze lingered on the younger man for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths before returning to Kyler. "The plaque," he said, his voice still low. "It has the wrong day for the commissioning of the Los Angeles." Kyler blinked, thrown off balance. He had expected fear, or at least compliance. He had not expected a correction. "What are you talking about?" "That plaque was vetted by Naval History Command." He glanced at it dismissively. "It's fine. You're just confused." Arthur shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "No, the public commissioning was in 76. The hull was laid down in 72. But she was seen and running silent trials by the third quarter of 75. That plaque is off by a year. It matters." This esoteric bit of history, delivered with such quiet certainty, was more infuriating to Kyler than an outright insult. It was a challenge to his domain, a subtle undermining of the very foundation of facts and figures he drilled into his recruits. He felt his authority being questioned not by a superior officer, but by a rambling old man in a flannel shirt. He took a step closer, invading Arthur's personal space. "Listen to me very carefully. Your opinion on naval history is not required. What is required is your immediate departure. You have trespassed in a secure training area that has consequences." He let the threat hang in the air, heavy and obvious. He looked around, spotting a group of recruits watching from a distance, and saw an opportunity for a lesson. Not a lesson for the old man, but for the recruits. A lesson in power. "You know," Kyler said, a cruel smile touching his lips, "we have standards here. Standards of cleanliness, of discipline. When a recruit fails to meet those standards, they are taught a lesson. They learn humility. They learn respect." He pointed a thumb over his shoulder toward the men's latrine down the hall. "One of my trainees did a poor job on the heads this morning. Left them a mess. Maybe you can show him how it's done. A little community service for your unauthorized visit." Briggs snickered. The proposition was absurd, a deliberate act of humiliation. They weren't just asking him to leave. They were seeking to break him, to turn him into a public spectacle of submission. Arthur looked from Kyler's smirking face to the latrine door. He saw the recruits, their faces a mixture of amusement and discomfort. He felt the sting of the insult, but it was a distant thing, a pinprick against a lifetime of true hardship. He had faced pressures that would have crushed this arrogant boy into dust, stared into darknesses Kyler couldn't even imagine. What was one more indignity? He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right," he said, his voice betraying no emotion. "Show me where the mops are." The moment hung in the air, thick with disbelief. Kyler had expected a protest, an argument, some outburst of geriatric fury that would justify him calling base security. He had not expected calm, quiet acceptance. The old man's compliance was, in its own way, more unnerving than defiance. It was as if Kyler's power meant nothing to him. The insult failing to land, but the act itself was what mattered. The visual of this stubborn old man on his hands and knees would be the lesson. "Briggs," Kyler barked, recovering his composure. "Get him a bucket and a brush, the full kit," as Briggs scurried off. A retired master sergeant named Gunn was pushing a wide dust mop down the adjacent corridor. Gunn had served 30 years in the fleet before taking the civilian maintenance job on the same base. Content to remain near the familiar sounds and smells of the Navy. He'd seen 1,000 young officers like Kyler, full of piss and vinegar, their authority a uniform they hadn't yet grown into. He saw the exchange from a distance, his eyes narrowing as he watched the old man in the windbreaker follow Briggs toward the janitor's closet. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the casual cruelty of the instructors. It was the old man himself. It was his posture. Despite the slight stoop of his age, he moved with a profound economy of motion, a stillness that wasn't frail, but contained. It was the walk of a man who had spent a lifetime in confined spaces where every movement had to be precise, where wasted energy could mean the difference between life and death. Gunn paused his work, leaning on his mop. His curiosity piqued as he watched Briggs return, thrusting a bucket, a scrub brush, and a bottle of industrial-strength cleaner at Arthur. The old man took them without a word, his gnarled hands surprisingly steady, and as he reached for the bucket, the sleeve of his windbreaker rode up his arm, exposing his wrist for a fleeting second. Gunn froze, his heart hammering against his ribs as he saw the faded, ghostly blue-green blur on weathered skin, unmistakable as the coiled serpent and trident of a unit that didn't officially exist. A specter from the darkest days of the Cold War, spoken of only in hushed whispers among old-timers. Gunn's breath caught as his mind raced, connecting the bearing. The quiet defiance, and now the tattoo, knowing it couldn't be because those men were all gone. Ghosts on a forgotten page of classified history. He watched, mesmerized, as Arthur pushed open the latrine door and disappeared inside, while Kyler and Briggs shared a triumphant smirk and turned back to their recruits, beginning a lecture on following orders without question, the irony hitting like a physical blow. Gunn abandoned his dust mop, his hands trembling as he pulled out his worn smartphone and fumbled with the screen, staring at the single number saved. Under the name "Do Not Call," a direct line to the Qing, personal aide of a man he had served under 20 years ago who was now a 4-star admiral commanding the entire submarine force. Knowing this call could end his quiet retirement, and that you didn't bother a man like that, unless the world was ending, Gunn pressed the button, and a crisp voice answered on the first ring. "Commander Wallace," Gunn whispered. "This is Master Sergeant Gunn, retired. I need to speak with the Admiral. It's a Spectre 7 matter." And dead silence filled the line before Wallace's voice returned sharp and urgent, giving him 60 seconds to explain. Gunn, his eyes fixed on the latrine door, spoke in a torrent of disbelief as he described the old man, the instructors, and the faded tattoo. Inside the latrine, the acrid smell of bleach and ammonia filled Arthur's nostrils, triggering memories of the USS Parka beneath polar ice. Blood and burned electronics thickened the air after a hydraulic line ruptured and injured 2 men. His hands once pressing gauze to a wounded sailor's leg as the floor ran slick with fluid and blood. The rhythmic scrape of the brush against the tile echoed the sound of rags erasing all traces of their presence. Every mission the same go where no one knew. Do what no one believed possible, and return leaving only silence. He worked methodically from the far corner, each stroke precise, knowing there was a right way to do any job. Whether disarming a sea mine in darkness, or scrubbing a toilet under the smug gaze of a child playing at being a man. Outside, Kyler's lecture reached its peak as he spoke of respect, rules, and humility, convinced the old man was learning his lesson. When the shriek of tires cut through his speech, and a black sedan bearing a 4-star flag skidded to a halt, followed by more vehicles, Admiral Thornton emerging with grim-faced officers in a sudden, overwhelming display of authority. Kyler and Briggs froze as terror replaced their arrogance. The Admiral's granite gaze sweeping the recruits, the instructors, and the discarded dust mop. His presence crushing the air as he asked who was in charge. Kyler stammered his rank, feeling it shrink into nothing as the Admiral stepped forward and asked where their visitor was, leaving Kyler drowning in confusion. Visitor? Did he mean the Admiral himself? Sir, I don't understand, Admiral. You're here, sir? He stammered, his carefully constructed composure shattering like glass as the Admiral's eyes narrowed into slits of pure fury. I'm not talking about myself. I am talking about the man you saw fit to welcome into your facility. I am talking about the civilian you just encountered. Where is he? The Admiral's gaze scanned the area, moving past the instructors, past the recruits, and finally locking onto the open door of the men's latrine as a low guttural sound escaped his lips, and he strode toward it. His entourage parting before him like the Red Sea, he stopped in the doorway, his massive frame filling the entrance, and saw Arthur Jenkins on his hands and knees, methodically scrubbing the grout between the tiles, standing frozen for 5 seconds with a face of incandescent rage and soul-deep reverence before slowly removing his 4-star cover and holding it over his heart. He turned his burning gaze on Kyler, now visibly trembling, and whispered with venom that he had this man cleaning his toilets, the words landing like a verdict that annihilated a life's worth of pride. Turning back, his voice stripped of anger and filled with profound respect, he softly called Commander Jenkins, "Sir," as Arthur slowly pushed himself up. Acknowledged the Admiral with a calm nod, and the Admiral stepped fully into the latrine before turning to the stunned audience and declaring that they stood in the presence of Commander Arthur Jenkins, United States Navy, retired, whose file was so classified they could not even read its cover, accusing Kyler of demanding respect from a man who defined its meaning, revealing that while their grandfathers played in sandboxes, this man was beneath the sea performing acts that altered the Cold War, naming him one of the original plank owners of Project Spectre, a man who held his breath to disable a Soviet device, navigated impossible Arctic storms, earned the Navy Cross in secret, and formed the silent foundation of everything they stood upon. He condemned them for having this legend scrubbing floors, then turned back to Arthur and rendered the sharpest salute of his life, requesting permission to come aboard as Arthur sighed, told the Admiral to be at ease, walked out of the latrine, stopped before Kyler, and placed a steady hand on his shoulder, gently telling him the floor was clean, that a job's a job and you either do it right or not at all, that he had learned something. Then turned to the Admiral using his first name and declined the escort as the Admiral quietly said the car was waiting. As Arthur Jenkins walked toward the exit, everyone stood in reverent silence, watching not just an old man leave but living history itself. A final lesson in true honor that needed no uniform, sought no validation, and was at its most powerful.